Buenos nachos, amigos, and welcome to another fine episode of Record Breakers. I am still PETEY RAVE. They're still keeping me around for God knows what reason. Here with me is my crew of much more talented people and much more interesting people. We've got Brett.
We keep you around because you do all of the work.
Okay, that's true. We got Drew.
You're also a pretty interesting guy.
And we got Patrick.
It's really about your hair, I think, it's the hair.
We're here to talk about music once again, and the provider of this week's album is none other than Drew. Drew, what do you got for this fine evening?
Well, I got a little band from Riverside, California, a band called Alien Ant Farm, and they hit it real big for a while with their cover of a Michael Jackson song, Smooth Criminal, and then slowly began to fade out. They had a couple of all radio hits, but nothing really that struck like Smooth Criminal did. And this is the album after that album, TruANT.
TruANT. I'll go with you, Brett. What were your expectations coming into this album?
I honestly couldn't tell my Alien Ant Farms from my Bucks Cherries or my Hoobastanks. I really had no idea. At the time that this album came out, I really wasn't paying attention to that style of music, but it was sort of the sound of the early aughts that I heard played on rock radio. But yeah, I came in here pretty much having no clue what I was getting into.
Patrick, what expectations did you have coming into this album?
I'm fairly familiar with the album that preceded this, Anthology, that was previously mentioned, because their cover of Smooth Criminal is brilliant, and it's one of those albums that at some point someone let me borrow, and I ripped into iTunes, and I've had it ever since, and I still listen to it, once a month or something. It's like, oh, I want to listen to Alien Ant Farm, so I do, and like I said, Anthology I'm reasonably familiar with. I had heard a few songs off of TruANT, but I had never actually listened to it as an album, so this was my first experience with this album, but far from my first experience with the band.
Yeah. Drew, what would be kind of the themes and elements that you would key in on an album like this?
Brett sort of alluded to it. In late 90s, early 2000s, alternative radio had a certain sort of sound. A lot of the play was getting played around this very overdriven guitar, sort of rock and roll, like heavier alternative music and whatever you want to call it. But to me, the great thing about Alien Ant Farm was they were a band that played that simple music, and every so often, one of the musicians in the band would poke his head out in the music and say, like, hey, I do a little bit more than just your simple music. And to me, my sort of love of Alien Ant Farm centers around one guy, and that would be Ty Zamora. To me, the bass in this record really pushes it forward. And one of the sort of elements that I love about Alien Ant Farm as a whole is their bass parts are always really cool. They keep a consistent groove, and then Ty will pepper in these crazy fills and stuff like that. And also, they were known as this band that was sort of the joke. Like, they did funny videos, they did, like, funny appearances and stuff like that. But their music was never that much of a joke to them. Lyrically, on a couple of songs here and there, it can get into, like, sort of weird, sad places. But the music always was really high energy, and I think really fun. They're one of those bands where if you want to put on a record for a wide-ranging group of people, that you don't want anybody to hate you for your musical taste, I guess you could say, Alien Ant Farm is one of those ones where I can just shove it into the background and I'm enjoying the music, or a couple of people are enjoying the music or not. Nobody absolutely wants to kill themselves listening to it, at least in my opinion. So they're one of those type of things. You can't really pin them into one thing, I don't think, but they are what they are.
Brett, what would be kind of the themes and elements that caught your attention?
They had a certain sound to them. Yeah, I will agree. The bass, they had one of the songs had a fretless bass that was doing some magic, and it's easy to do fretless bad. So somebody knew what they were doing with their bass. But the songs they have that dark sound before they resolve. It's not quite the standard chord progression of the grunge stuff that was more simple, followed the same formula, but it has the talk singing, with a smattering of moans, a little bit of little bark every now and then. Not really a sing type songs, but yeah, that's pretty common with an album of this vintage. But it definitely was produced by the same people that made the other kinds of music. I don't know if that was the product that they were coming out to give us, but it's the one that we got. But yeah.
To iterate that, I don't know if you looked up who actually produced TruANT, but it was Robert and Dean DeLeo, two of the members of Stone Temple Pilots.
Yeah.
So to say this sounds like the things that were like right before it, but it it was produced by STP guys. Yep.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. But as you were saying, Brett.
Yeah, I mean it's sort of it has the chord progressions. If you listen to them, they sort of go off in some way that's almost a little bit sort of sounds like a sour note before it resolves, and that's common from then. But it's also a way to sort of give a flavor to what you're trying to push forward with your lyrics, and it worked. But it was a tool that a lot of people had in their toolbox at this time.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, what would be some of the things that stood out for you thematically?
So I will reiterate what Drew said about the bass player. The best musician in this band's the bass player, probably by a large margin, and that's not to discount the other guys. He's just really good at what he does. He plays really good bass lines, and they bother to mix them in such that you can actually hear them, which is something I think a lot of music does a really poor job of, just sort of like the bass is really only there to cover the low end, but we're not going to make it such that you can actually hear what he's doing. Whereas with this, the bass on, almost every song on it. Vocals, I think, probably are the other thing that stand out on this record for me. There's for what the guy's name is off the top of my head, but he's got a really particular voice that was, at this point in music, a lot of people were trying to sound like James Hetfield from Metallica, regardless of what genre of music they were in. They just were sort of grunting and yelling a lot, and this is kind of its own thing separate from that. It's again more, more alternative, but like in the right way, like alternative rock. And I think there's a lot of songs on this where clearly they wanted to try to showcase him as the front man of the band, and I think they did a good job of it in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm. Drew, what would be some of the key tracks that you would zero in on?
There's a lot of tracks in this that I think are really, really good. But the first two tracks to me stand out as sort of 1,000 Days and Drifting Apart are what I think of when I think of like the bass, like not bass as in Ty Zamora, but the bass of what Alien Ant Farm sort of does and is in these two songs. Thick grooving bass lines, a overdriven guitar line. Dryden was the name you were looking for. His vocals sort of doing their thing over this really thick, sort of heavier music. They jump around as the album goes on to like different sounds here and there, but this is always, I think when I think of Alien Ant Farm, it's this sort of thing. Sarah Wynn, I wanted to bring up because Sarah Wynn is, when I say they sort of get into like dark areas sometimes in the lyrics, sort of sadder areas, Sarah Wynn is that to me. And it feels like that call out. A lot of bands do the "we were on drugs" sort of songs, but my favorite songs about drugs are always the ones that are like almost reaching out to the person, like the lyricist is trying to help somebody. The song These Days was great. It's just, to me, a catchy chorus. Also, if you want to see a funny video, go check out that one, specifically the BET one. Hilarious to me.
It's excellent. I watched it too today.
Yeah.
Oh, God. The reactions from like Lil' Kim were brilliant. But also, Tia Lupe was something that they had a lot of instrumentation in there, and it was layered very, very well, and they really sort of showed that they weren't just this band. They, like, actually could compose tunes as well. Like, that to me is always the fun part, is seeing a band tackle a genre that's way far removed from what they really are. Also, Ty Zamora proves that he can not only play a bass, but can play a badass little, I learned the name for it today while I was researching some of my notes. A kalimba. The badass thumb piano he's playing at the end is pretty awesome. But that song to me is just a lot of fun. Like, and that's the album in general. It's good music, it's solid music, it's well composed, and it's fun. Like,
yeah, it kind of pretty much gives a general idea of the album. Brett, what would be some of the tracks that you caught your attention?
Glow. That's their earworm track. That's the one that was probably made to get play. I don't think it did. But it's the simple chord progression, has a clap track and some hand percussions done, some acapella even. It's kind of they're trying to do an Island in the Sun type thing. But you know, it's listen to it. It's got really, really good studio reverb on the guitars. There's something some good behind that track. More than hand clapping and some acapella. But I also the song These Days is sort of more of the formula of that generation, like that not quite over the hump of the 90s. But there was I had some problems with it in a couple other tracks. It seemed like they were a little heavy-handed with mixing of the drums. The cymbals were a little bit, I don't know if they were, so they had the larger hi-hats they were just smacking on all day, but there was a little bit of a tinny, brittle sound in my ears through that track. But you know, and Nevermint, they have a barely audible organ. It's really good though, barely audible. But you know, wah trumpet and piano never go wrong.
Yeah.
Throw that into any album, and you'll make me happy.
Patrick, what would be some of the tracks that caught your attention?
I'll agree with Drew on the opener, 1,000 Days. Just a good song. It's got kind of my rub with Alien Ant Farm, and this is mostly now, is the guitars are very like that era of butt rock new metal, like way too overdriven. Like, it's not just a good sounding amp; it is a good sounding amp with then an unnecessarily cranked up distortion pedal in front of it, and you know, it gets a little much sometimes, where I would rather have the clarity of just a, you know, purely, you know, overdriven, you know, amp making the guitar sound. So it gets a little butt rocky in terms of the guitars, but there's some really good songs. These Days, which again, it's the single, it sounds like a single, it's catchy, and it brings me back to what I like about Anthology, which I think is overall a much catchier, poppier record. In a good way, because I think that's what these guys kind of were. They're an alternative rock band, pop rocky kind of thing. They write catchy, fun songs that, you know, usually have something to say, and they have a really good bass player, but there was a lot less catchy on this than their previous record. Tia Lupe was just good because it was different, and the fretless bass, which I think we talked about along at the beginning of this, I just was like, is that a fretless bass? It sounds unmistakably like a fretless bass. You don't hear fretless bass on early 2000s alternative records. Most bass players of that era were, you know, grinding with a pick, trying to just, you know, rip along whatever the you know, root note of the chord that was being played by the guitar was. There are a few songs that get a little like new metal guitar, like Rubber Mallet and SS Recognize are straight new metal guitar, and it kind of ruins what is otherwise an okay song. But kind of overall, it's just not as good as what came before it, but it's also not bad at all. It's not, I can't dislike it. There's nothing to dislike for me, but I also can't love it.
Interesting. Some interesting tracks to bring up and some interesting points. Brett, overall, let's bring it back around. Overall, what would be your thoughts on the album as a conclusion?
This album would not be made like this today. It is definitely a piece out of time. There was skill involved. There were people with good chops that making this music. It's definitely as far from what Brett was into at the time as you can possibly be. But give it a listen. We're just a bunch of assholes talking about our own opinions. We don't come at the end of our show. We don't smack a gavel and be like, "That's it. There's no more reviewing." Go and listen to this stuff. See what you think. It's worth a listen. Nothing that I've listened to, barring one band, has ever hurt me. So, just go out there and give this a try.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, what would be your thoughts on the album overall?
I would echo what Brett said, sort of that it's a pretty okay record. It's not bad. It's not, I don't think it's their best. I think if you've never listened to Alien Ant Farm, I think you would do yourself a better favor by listening to Anthology. I think it's just simply a better record. But there's a lot of good here, and if you want to feel a little nostalgic for your high school days, if you're in your late 20s, like several of us, this is a really good way to remind yourself what was going on in popular music in 2003. I mean, it's of its time, but it's not ruined by that like a lot of things are. Like if you hear a Limp Bizkit song or Korn or anything from that sort of same late 90s, early 2000s, like hard rock, new metal era, it really just sounds awful now, where I think Alien Ant Farm, they're removed just enough from that, being just sort of a rock band on kind of doing their own thing, that you can enjoy it and still, look back to those heady days of our youth.
Mm-hmm. It's not Power Man 5000. Just throwing that out there.
It is not Mudvayne. There is nobody screaming dig.
Dig.
Nobody is like a chainsaw tearing anyone's ass raw. So
it's fun. It's fun rock music, and I think that can be said of every Alien Ant Farm song I've heard. Is they're fun. Like they're doing what they do to make things that are enjoyable to listen to.
Mm-hmm. Drew, what would be your conclusions about the album overall?
To me, Alien Ant Farm as a whole and this album is something that I wanted to bring up because on the show we bring up weird, odd music to listen to, and part of it is this band I think is one of those bands that got forgotten, and they had the one hit, and they sort of had the one-hit wonder syndrome a little bit. They had, like I said, a couple of alternative radio sort of play hits, but they didn't have the big hit, and they were kind of falling by the wayside. This is the album that came directly after that album, and I brought that because I think that people like Swagger, like, oh, well, I have Anthology, it's whatever, but the band kept going. They just recently lost Ty Zamora, which I know none of them are listening to me. But if they were, I'd say I'd get Ty Zamora back. I don't know who he's roading and bass teching for these days, but get him away from them.
According to Wikipedia, Sam Rivers from Limp Bizkit, if you want to be really depressed.
Right. I read that and I don't want to believe it, which is why I'm saying whoever. Get him back. And overall, that's the thing, is I feel like they were forgotten, and I feel like they're where they do have elements of the things that were around them. I think they rose above it with solid songwriting and catchier hooks and a damn fine bass player. I will agree with Brett, though, on the production. Sometimes the cymbals get a little bit of that wall of sound feel to them, and I don't dig that so much on this record either. I think they fixed that later on, but that's to be said. But if you remember them from Smooth Criminal and not much else, I would say do yourself a favor and check it out. You might find a little bit more there than you bargained for.
Yeah, definitely agree, Drew. That it's there's more than meets the eye when it comes to Alien Ant Farm.
They're Transformers. It's fine.
Yeah, or Transmorphers if you can't afford the real license. So that brings us to our main event of the evening, which is our haiku reviews. As we all know, if you're a regular listener of the show or viewer or whatever, we do our haiku reviews. And let's just get it started. I'm going to go with Patrick first. Patrick, what is your haiku?
Base game is on point. Songs lack something from before. Follow-up syndrome.
Brett, what is your haiku?
Not that it matters, but I can honestly tell this band from its peers.
Mm-hmm. I'll throw in my haiku. Quirky and sincere, interesting guitar work, full of cool moments. And Drew, what is your haiku?
Some alt-rock music from some solid musicians. Always a fallback.
Mm-hmm. And that's our thoughts on the album. If you want to play along with us at home, Record Breakers the home game, you can do that on Spotify right now with our playlist that we curate and we manage for y'all. Just follow along and listen along. You can find this record, and you can find our next record. Our next record, barring a guest, we're not sure about the guest, but our next record among the four of us is going to be my turn. And mine's, speaking of alternative radio, is going to be Arcade Fire's The Suburbs. Yes, that record that everybody told you was the new hotness, is actually an interesting record. So we're going to talk about that next week. But that is next week, and this is this week, and this week is done. You can find us all over the internet. Patrick is at The Swagger. Brett is at HIBBARD, HIBBYBIBBARD. Drew is at X, Drucifer X. I'm at PETEY RAVE. The show is at 4 Record Breakers. That's the number 4 Record Breakers. The show is recordbreakerspodcast.com, recordbreakerspodcast@gmail.com. Give us some feedback. Let us know on our website, in our email. Let us know what we're doing. Give us some valuable feedback. We would love to know what we can do to make this show better. So listen to it. iTunes, Stitcher, anywhere you can throw in an RSS feed, you can throw us on there as well and enjoy us. But that's it. Until next time. Hasta los huevos.
Toodaloo, weed whackers.
That's it. My shit is rigorous.
Shitbirds. My favorite songs about drugs are the ones that tell you that if you do them, people think that you're cool.
Mm-hmm.